My name is Amelia, and the night I was thrown out of my own home felt like a scene from a nightmare that had been waiting in the shadows for years. One moment, I was the wife who had carried the weight of our life for 7 years, the woman who had believed in her husband's dreams, even when they collapsed time and again. The next moment, I was standing in the doorway with a suitcase shoved into my arms, hearing words that sliced through me like a blade. You are useless to me now. It began only 24 hours after my husband David learned that his father's estate had left him $62 million. The man I thought I knew, the man I had cooked meals for, stayed up late waiting for comforted after countless job losses vanished overnight. In his place stood someone I barely recognized. His face carried the same familiar features, but the warmth was gone. His eyes were cold, calculating, and brimming with a kind of power that had nothing to do with love. That night I looked around our home as if I were seeing it for the first and last time. The photos on the walls, the couch where we had once curled up to watch old movies, the kitchen table where I had graded reports from work while he sketched building designs, all of it blurred into the background. What stood out was the sneer on his face, the way he gripped the suitcase, as if he had been waiting years to rid himself of me. Money did not create this cruelty. It revealed it. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation. But my voice caught in my throat as the reality sank in. Harold, my father-in-law, had been gone less than a week, and already his son had turned into a stranger. There was no hesitation in David's actions. He had changed the locks, transferred accounts into his name only, and now, with a final shove, expelled me from the life I had built beside him. The air outside was sharp and cool against my face as I stumbled into the night. Streetlights flickered above me, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of betrayal. I sat in my car with the suitcase beside me, hands trembling against the steering wheel. How could a marriage built on 7 years of shared struggles, whispered promises and vows made under an altar collapse in less than a day? What haunted me most was not just his cruelty, but the realization that Harold had seen something I had refused to see. The bond Harold and I shared had always made David uneasy. I remembered the last time I spoke with Harold alone, the way his frail hand squeezed mine, the look in his eyes that suggested he knew more than he said. Trust that I see everything clearly, he had whispered. At the time, I thought it was his way of thanking me for caring for his son. But now, in the silence of that dark night, his words echoed like a warning. David's betrayal was not just about greed. It was about years of resentment, years of feeling overshadowed by my steady career, years of bitterness toward the closeness I shared with his father. The inheritance had simply given him the excuse to shed the mask. I sat there for hours, frozen, staring at the front door that was no longer mine to walk through. The home that had once been filled with laughter, arguments, dreams, and disappointments was now off limits to me. All because David had chosen wealth over loyalty, pride over partnership, ego over love. That night marked the end of a chapter I thought would last forever. But it was also the beginning of something I could not yet see, a path Harold had quietly prepared, a test of resilience I never asked for, but would be forced to endure. At that moment, I did not know about the hidden clause in the will. I did not know that justice had been set in motion long before David pushed me out the door. All I knew was that the man I had sacrificed for the man I had trusted had turned into a stranger in the blink of an eye. And as I gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, I whispered to myself words that felt like both a question and a vow. Who am I without him, and what will I become now? I grew up in a modest neighborhood in Connecticut where hard work was the only currency that mattered. My parents believed in sacrifice, in waking up before dawn, and in saving every dollar so their children could have opportunities they never had. Because of them, I went to college, studied business management, and eventually built a career in marketing that provided both stability and pride. Numbers came naturally to me. Budgets, plans, strategies, they were puzzles I loved solving. I had always dreamed of starting my own consulting business, but that dream slipped quietly into the background when I met David. David was everything I thought I wanted. He was magnetic handsome, brimming with charm that could light up any room. He spoke passionately about architecture, his dream of designing buildings that would inspire generations. I believed him because I wanted to believe. I saw in him not just potential, but also a mirror of my own hunger for purpose. 6 months after we met, he proposed on a windswept beach, and I said yes, without hesitation. The wedding was small, but my heart was full. I promised to stand by him in sickness and health, in triumph and failure. What I did not realize at the time was how soon I would be tested on those vows. David bounced from one job to another, each ending with a story about unfair bosses or stifled creativity. I carried the financial burden on my shoulders, telling myself it was temporary, that his big break was just around the corner. Late nights at my office became routine. Extra projects piled onto my desk. Promotions that should have felt like victories only meant more hours away from home. Still, when David whispered promises of a brighter future, "Once my career takes off, I'll take care of you the way you deserve," I clung to them like lifelines. Looking back now, I see the truth. I was not just a wife. I was a provider, a safety net, the person who kept the roof above our heads and the lights burning when his ambitions faltered. I thought love meant carrying someone else's weight until they found their footing. I thought loyalty meant silence when the burden grew heavier. But the silence came at a cost. I lost pieces of myself in the process. I postponed my dream of starting my own business. I said no to opportunities that would have required relocation because I told myself David's breakthrough might come tomorrow. I ignored the exhaustion creeping into my bones, the resentment building quietly each time I worked late while he experimented with designs that never sold. The truth is, I believed in him more than he believed in himself, and I paid the price for that faith. Even so, there were moments when I thought our struggles made us stronger. When I walked into Harold's house for Sunday dinners and saw the pride in his eyes as I spoke about my work, I felt like maybe the sacrifices were worth it. But David never shared that pride. Instead, he saw in me a constant reminder of his own failures. At the time, I brushed it off as stress, as the toll of chasing big dreams. I told myself he just needed more time, more encouragement, more understanding. I did not realize that resentment was festering beneath the surface, turning admiration into envy, gratitude into bitterness. Years passed and I carried us forward. Rent was paid, bills were met, vacations were planned on modest budgets. I believed this was what marriage required. I told myself that loyalty meant endurance, even when the cracks in our foundation widened with each passing season. But endurance without reciprocity is not loyalty, it is self-destruction. Looking back, I wish I had asked harder questions. I wish I had demanded more balance. Instead, I convinced myself that love meant giving until there was nothing left to give. By the time Harold passed and left behind a fortune, I had already been living with a husband who saw me less as a partner and more as a safety net he had outgrown. That night when he told me I was useless, I realized the cruelest truth of all the years I had spent carrying him were invisible to him. He had erased the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the promotions earned under pressure. In his mind, the moment money arrived, my worth expired. If you are hearing this now, let me pause for a moment. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening from? Drop your city or state in the comments. I would love to know how far this story reaches. And if you believe stories like mine matter, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because the truth is, this story was only just beginning, and what happened after Harold's death revealed everything David had been hiding all along. Harold Wilson was a man who carried his reputation like armor, sharp suits, sharper words, and a presence that filled every room. I was terrified the first time I met him. David had painted a picture of a father impossible to please, a man who demanded perfection and never found it. I braced myself for cold stares and curt dismissal. Instead, I found something else. Harold studied me carefully over dinner, his eyes narrowing, not in judgment, but in curiosity. He asked about my career in marketing, about the choices that had led me there. He listened, really listened, in a way that made me feel seen. When I mentioned books on financial planning, I had devoured in college, his lips twitched into something close to a smile. After dessert, he invited me into his study and pointed to shelves lined with titles. I recognized biographies of self-made leaders, dense works on investment strategies, timeless guides to personal finance. "You understand the value of responsibility," Harold said quietly. "That is a lesson I have tried to teach David for years." From that night forward, our relationship took on a life of its own. Sunday dinners became tradition. While David found excuses to step away early, Harold and I would linger at the table, locked in conversations about business trends and the shifting tides of global markets. He recommended books. He shared stories of mistakes that had nearly cost him everything and the lessons carved out of failure. "You remind me of myself at your age," he told me once, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "The difference is, you have empathy. That is what makes your strength dangerous and rare." I carried those words with me like a secret badge of honor. It felt as though Harold was not only mentoring me, but also placing a kind of trust in me that he had never given his son. That trust was a gift, but it was also a wedge. David noticed, and he resented every second of it. At first, his jabs seemed harmless. "Don't try to impress him too much," he would mutter on our drives home. But the sarcasm grew sharper with time. He accused me of siding with his father. He mocked the way Harold praised my insight, calling it a performance. What he failed to understand was that Harold wasn't impressed by show. He simply respected authenticity, and David mistook respect for competition. What David saw as betrayal was in reality Harold's attempt to teach him through me. But instead of learning, David pulled further away. He dismissed Harold's advice, laughed at his warnings, and bristled every time his father complimented me. I could feel the distance widening, not just between father and son, but between husband and wife. Looking back, Harold's affection for me was a lifeline I didn't know I would need. He recognized the truth about his son, the carelessness with money, the inability to shoulder responsibility, the tendency to mask insecurity with bravado. Harold saw it all. And in his final months, when his body grew frail but his mind remained sharp, he began to drop hints. "I love my son," he confessed to me once, his voice trembling from illness. "But I worry about his judgment, especially with money." I didn't realize it then, but Harold was preparing me for the storm that was coming and for the role he intended me to play in the aftermath. David never forgave the bond his father and I shared. What had started as a spark of resentment smoldered into bitterness. Each compliment Harold gave me was to David another reminder of his own shortcomings. And though I tried to soothe his pride, tried to remind him that Harold loved him in his own way, the damage was already done. In David's eyes, I was no longer just his wife. I was the rival who had stolen his father's respect. And when Harold passed, that bitterness became fuel for the choices that would soon destroy him. Before I move forward, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like someone resented you not for what you did wrong, but for what you did right? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know I'm not alone in this experience. Because what came next proved Harold's instincts right and revealed the side of David he had hidden for years. The day Harold's diagnosis was revealed, it felt as though the air had been sucked out of every room. Terminal cancer. Less than a year to live. I remember gripping the edge of the hospital bed, trying to absorb the words, while David stood frozen beside me, staring at the floor tiles as if they could offer an escape. From that moment on, everything changed. For me, grief was an anchor, pulling me into action. I cleared my calendar, rearranged my workload, and made sure Harold never attended an appointment alone. I sat with him through chemo sessions, brought books for him to read, and kept notes during consultations. I learned to read the small cues, the tightening of his jaw, the slump of his shoulders, signs he was fighting more than just the disease. David processed grief differently, or at least that was the excuse he used. Around family, he put on a show dabbing at dry eyes, sighing dramatically, and clasping hands during prayers. But when the crowd dispersed, his mask slipped. He scrolled endlessly on his phone, arriving late to the hospital and leaving early with flimsy excuses. Hospitals make me uncomfortable, he'd say. Or I have to clear my mind for design work. But there was no design work, only avoidance. Harold noticed. One afternoon, as I helped him adjust his blanket, he whispered, "He's always been like this. Everything for show, nothing beneath." His words cut not because they surprised me, but because they confirmed what I had tried so hard to deny. Despite his weakness, Harold's mind remained razor sharp. Between treatments, he shared stories of his youth, of risks that nearly ruined him, and the lessons forged from failure. Sometimes he spoke of regret, mostly about David. "I love him," Harold admitted once, his voice trembling. "But I fear for him. Money will not save him. It will destroy him." In those quiet moments, he leaned on me in ways that made David bristle. Harold thanked me for bringing stability, for being the daughter he never had. His frail hand gripped mine as he said, "Trust that I see everything clearly." At the time, I thought it was gratitude. Later, I would understand it was foresight. Meanwhile, my marriage strained under the weight of both grief and resentment. I returned home from late hospital visits to find David absent, or worse, sulking about how much time I spent with his father. He accused me of making him look bad, of overshadowing him, even in his father's final months. The irony was suffocating while I was juggling hospital schedules and conference calls. He was busy cultivating an image of the grieving son while abandoning the role in reality. The funeral exposed these cracks for everyone to see. I poured myself into the planning, choosing hymns Harold loved, organizing the reception, ensuring every detail reflected the man he was. David offered little, claiming sorrow made logistics impossible. Yet when the day arrived, his performance took center stage. He sat in the front pew, dabbing at eyes that never shed tears, while I delivered a eulogy that left the congregation in tears. People came up afterward, clasping my hands, telling me Harold had considered me his daughter. I watched David's jaw tighten with each word, and I understood then Harold's death had not just left David fatherless. It had stripped away the illusion he had clung to. Everyone could see what Harold had always seen, his son's hollow grief contrasted against my genuine devotion. That resentment would fester, and soon, with $62 million in his grasp, David would use it as both weapon and shield. But Harold's last gift to me was not just his trust. It was the warning embedded in his final look. He knew his son. He knew what money would unleash. Before I move on, I want to pause. If you've ever shouldered the weight of care while others stood aside, tell me in the comments. Your story matters too, and sharing it keeps the truth alive. Because what followed Harold's passing was not just grief. It was the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about my marriage. When Harold passed, I thought the worst was already behind me. I believed the coming days would be about mourning, healing, and maybe rebuilding the fragile connection with my husband. I could not have been more wrong. 2 days after the funeral, we sat in the attorney's office, the air thick with silence. The mahogany table stretched before us like a barrier, and when Mr. Lawson Harold's lawyer began to read the will, I held my breath. The words hit the room like thunder. To my son, David Wilson, I leave the sum of $62 million. I remember the way David's fingers tightened around mine until it hurt. His grief vanished in an instant, replaced by a gleam in his eyes I had never seen before. Elation, greed, triumph. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery, and in many ways he had. The rest of the will mentioned small bequests to employees and charities, but David wasn't listening, neither was I. The number 62 million echoed in my ears. Harold had been wealthy, yes, but I had never imagined the scope of his fortune. The moment we stepped out of the office, David announced, "We need to celebrate." He swept me into the city's most expensive restaurant, ordered champagne, without glancing at the menu, and called friends I didn't even know he still had. By the time we returned home, he was buzzing with plans. Vacation, homes, luxury cars. investments that sounded more like fantasies. The next morning, I woke to the sound of his voice on the phone. By afternoon, a $200,000 sports car gleamed in our driveway. He didn't ask. He didn't even mention it until I confronted him. "It's my inheritance," he said, his voice sharp, unfamiliar. "I don't need permission." Within days, our finances transformed. Joint accounts were suddenly locked. Passwords changed without explanation. He assured me it was for organization, but the truth was plain: I was being cut out. Strangers began flowing through our home, slick men with flashy smiles, women who clung to his arm at dinners I was no longer invited to. They called themselves business partners, investors, visionaries. I called them vultures. Our once quiet home filled with late-night meetings, bottles of champagne, and promises of ventures that would double the fortune. David dressed the part now. Designer suits, custom shoes, a wardrobe worth more than my annual salary. I tried to reach him. I cooked his favorite meal, lit candles, poured wine. He never showed. His phone went unanswered, and when he finally stumbled in past midnight, he smelled of cologne and liquor, muttering something about opportunities before collapsing into bed. When I suggested grief counseling, hoping some part of him was still reeling from Harold's death, he laughed. "I don't need therapy. What I need is space." Space. The word rang like a verdict. What had once been our marriage was quickly becoming a business transaction, and I was the expendable half. Every attempt to discuss our future was brushed aside. When I mentioned starting the family we had once dreamed about, he waved it off with a dismissive, "We have plenty of time." His eyes never left his phone. The truth was unavoidable. Harold's fortune hadn't changed David. It had revealed him. It stripped away the thin layer of dependence of humility and exposed the arrogance beneath. I stood in our kitchen one night, staring at the empty seat across from me, and realized I was already alone. Let me pause here. Have you ever seen someone change the moment money entered their life? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your perspective. And if you believe stories like this uncover truths that often stay hidden, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next part. Because the sports car, the new friends, the endless parties, those were only the beginning. The cracks in our marriage were about to split wide open, and the betrayal that followed would leave scars I never imagined. The first time I noticed something was truly wrong was a receipt. It was tucked inside the pocket of David's jacket, carelessly left on a chair. $5,000 for dinner. Champagne worth more than our monthly rent in the early years. Entrees stacked on the bill, like trophies. The date, Saturday night, 11 o'clock, was the same night he claimed to be in meetings. My stomach twisted, but I wanted to believe it was a business event. I wanted to believe my husband wasn't the kind of man who would betray me so soon after inheriting his father's fortune. But the evidence kept piling up. Credit card statements arrived with charges for jewelry. I had never seen hotel rooms in our own city, designer clothes that didn't fit him or me. And then came the call that confirmed my worst fears. A real estate agent, cheerful and professional, asked if I was excited about the Malibu property. My heart sank. David had made a down payment on a beachfront house I knew nothing about. He said it was a surprise. The agent explained, her voice faltering when she realized I had no idea what she was talking about. Still, I held on to denial, until the morning his phone chimed. He was in the shower, and I thought it might be important. The name Veronica lit up the screen. The message was simple. "Last night was amazing. Miss you already. When can you get away from her again?" My hands trembled as I scrolled further. Pictures, intimate words, plans for their next meeting. It wasn't a fling. It was an affair, one that had started just days after Harold's funeral. That same afternoon, my friend Kimberly called, hesitant. "I don't know how to tell you this," she said, "but I saw David yesterday. He was at the mall, with a woman. They looked close." Her pause told me everything. She was afraid to say what I already knew. That night, I waited for him. When he walked through the door, I laid it all out: his phone, the receipts, the testimony of friends. My voice was steady, though inside I was breaking. "Tell me the truth," I said. His face shifted like a mask cracking. First shock, then denial, then anger. He accused me of spying, of invading his privacy, of twisting reality. When that failed, he smirked coldly and said the words that shattered what little hope remained. Fine. So what if I am seeing someone I deserve to be happy? I reminded him we were married. He looked at me with contempt. To someone who can't give me what I need. Veronica understands me. She supports me without judgment. Unlike you, always worried about money and responsibility. Each word was a dagger. He compared us, praised her youth, her beauty, her carefree spirit, and tore me down in the same breath. I settled for you, he sneered. You were safe when I needed stability, but I resented how my father preferred you. Did you enjoy being the daughter he never had? Tears stung my eyes, but I held my ground. I supported you when no one else did, I whispered. He laughed, cruel and bitter. You supported me because you loved control. Admit it. You were waiting for Harold's money. It was madness. He had rewritten our history, casting himself as the victim and me as a manipulative schemer. The man who had once promised me the world now looked at me like I was the enemy. Before I continue, let me ask you this. Have you ever been blamed for sacrifices you made out of love? Has someone ever twisted your devotion into accusation? Share your story in the comments. I know I'm not the only one who's lived through this. Because that night in our kitchen, I realized something devastating. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just betrayal. David had been waiting for an excuse to throw me away. And soon, he would make that choice final, with a cruelty I still struggle to comprehend. 3 weeks after the funeral, the truth of our marriage had become impossible to ignore. David's presence at home had grown rare, his excuses thin, his absences stretching from hours to full nights. I remember standing alone in our kitchen staring at the empty space where my husband should have been. Some nights he didn't return at all. Meetings, drinks, investments. His stories were endless, yet none of them included me. Our joint checking account, once a symbol of partnership, was nearly drained. Large withdrawals appeared without explanation, and when I confronted him, he waved off my questions. I'm moving funds to better investment vehicles, he said. You wouldn't understand the complexities. And then came the Malibu property, a down payment made in secret, a misdirected confirmation email from the real estate agent. Another proof that David had been orchestrating his life and excluding me long before I understood the full extent. It was in that moment that I realized the depth of his betrayal. He had not merely strayed emotionally, he had rewritten the rules of our shared life. My contributions, my sacrifices, my stability, they were invisible to him now. But the breaking point arrived quietly in the form of a text I glimpsed while he showered. Veronica, last night was amazing. Miss you already. When can you get away from her again? It confirmed what I already feared. David had begun his affair almost immediately after Harold's death. The man I thought I knew, the one I had carried on my shoulders for years, was gone. I stayed calm, although my hands shook. When he finally arrived home that evening, I laid everything on the kitchen table: phone, credit card statements, emails. I described to him clearly and firmly what Kimberly had seen at the mall and the evidence of his clandestine life. I asked him to be truthful, to finally account for his actions. David's reaction was immediate: shock, denial, anger cycling in seconds. He accused me of spying, of invading his privacy. When my calmness refused to yield, he shifted tactics. Fine, he said with a chilling detachment. So what if I am seeing someone I deserve to be happy? I reminded him we were married. His response was cold and calculated. To someone who cannot give me what I need. Veronica understands me in ways you never could. She appreciates my vision and supports my ambitions without judgment. You worry about budgets, responsibility, your career. I was suffocating. Every accusation was precise, designed to wound. He referenced our history, claiming I stayed for money and status. He recast our shared years, portraying himself as the victim. And through it all, I felt a mixture of disbelief and clarity. I had been invisible to the man I loved, just as Harold had feared. Before moving forward, let me pause. Have you ever had someone twist your loyalty into blame? Leave a comment, I'd love to know I'm not alone. And if you want to see how I turn this devastation into empowerment, hit subscribe so you won't miss the next part of the story. Because the weeks that followed would reveal not only David's true character, but also the strategy Harold had quietly set in motion, a plan that would ensure justice, even if it took the weight of $62 million to deliver. After that night, everything shifted. The house that had been our shared sanctuary for 7 years became a constant reminder of betrayal. David moved like a ghost through the rooms, leaving chaos in his wake. I spent hours sitting in my car after work, trying to collect the scattered pieces of my life. Eventually, I called Jessica, a friend who had always been my anchor, and she offered her spare room without hesitation. That night, sitting on her couch with a suitcase at my feet, I felt a mix of exhaustion, disbelief, and a strange flicker of resolve. The following days were a blur. My hands shook constantly. Eating became almost impossible. Sleep only came in brief, nightmare-laden intervals. Each morning I stared at my reflection, a shadow of the woman I had been. My wardrobe, once carefully chosen, now felt meaningless. Sweatpants and messy hair became my uniform of grief. Jessica's presence was a quiet lifeline. She brought tea, encouraged small meals, and sat silently beside me while I tried to process the enormity of what had happened. I had carried the weight of David's failures, the household finances, the hopes of a marriage that promised partnership, yet here I was, discarded like an object. 7 years of loyalty, patience, and sacrifice crumbled in a single day. The sense of betrayal was so heavy, it pressed against my chest, making every breath a labor. Eventually, practicality forced me to act. My salary, while stable, could not support the lifestyle I had lost. I spent hours scrolling through rental listings, searching for a modest apartment where I could rebuild some sense of normalcy. The day I finally found a small one-bedroom manageable in terms of rent and security deposit, I felt the first flicker of control return. Collecting my belongings from our shared home was humiliating and surreal. I coordinated with David via text, arranging a time when he would be out, but entering that house, once filled with our shared memories, felt like stepping into a void. Many personal items had vanished. Family heirlooms, jewelry passed down through generations, carefully framed photographs all missing. My home office had been stripped bare. Garden tools were snapped in half. Jessica whispered, "He is doing this deliberately. He wants to hurt you." The thought made my stomach churn, but it also ignited something deeper, the realization that I would not let this define me. 2 weeks later, the divorce papers arrived. David had retained Thomas Bernard, a notoriously aggressive attorney, known for representing wealthy clients in contentious splits. The language was cold, almost mocking. The terms were designed to humiliate: a one-time settlement of $35,000, 6 months of health insurance, and a non-disclosure agreement to prevent me from speaking about his behavior publicly. Finding legal representation within my limited means was challenging. After several consultations with lawyers demanding retainers I could not afford, I connected with Melissa Kwan, a recently licensed attorney, willing to take the case at a reduced rate. Her initial review shocked me. "This is completely unfair," she said. "He's claiming you contributed nothing to the marriage while you supported him for years. He offers no alimony despite the significant income disparity." I realized then that my life as I had known it had been intentionally dismantled. The juxtaposition of David's indulgent spending and my precarious reality was stark. Social media flaunted his new lifestyle: European vacations, Michelin-starred dinners, exclusive events, all while I struggled to rebuild a sense of stability from scratch. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, I made a decision. I would survive. I would fight, but strategically. I accepted the minimal settlement as a starting point, not a conclusion. Every action I took from that point forward was deliberate. I was no longer the woman who allowed circumstances to dictate her worth. The betrayal, the humiliation, the theft of stability, it would become the soil from which my resilience would grow. Before moving to the next part, let me ask you, have you ever faced a moment where your world fell apart in a single day? Share your experience in the comments below. And if you want to see how I turned this devastation into power, make sure you subscribe. Because what I was about to discover, Harold's hidden clause, would change everything and shift the balance of power entirely in my favor. 3 days after signing the preliminary divorce settlement, a call came that I could hardly believe. The man on the line introduced himself as Walter Green, Harold's personal attorney. He had managed Harold's most private legal affairs for decades. "Miss Amelia," he said politely, "there are additional matters regarding your father-in-law's estate that require your attention." My first instinct was suspicion. Could this be another ploy by David, some trick to extract more from me? I hesitated, explaining that the divorce was finalized. Walter assured me calmly and clearly that this was entirely unrelated. Or rather, he added with a slight smile, "It is related, but not in the way you might think. This meeting will be to your benefit." Curiosity outweighed caution. The next day, I found myself in a small but elegant law office downtown. Walter Green, elderly yet sharp-eyed, greeted me with a measured warmth that immediately put me at ease. "Thank you for coming," he said, guiding me to a chair. He asked a direct question. Did David initiate the divorce, or had you? I answered honestly. He had thrown me out, had contacted lawyers, and pursued a hasty settlement. "And did you contest or attempt to reconcile?" he asked. I explained how I had suggested counseling had tried to salvage the marriage, and how David had refused. Walter nodded, making notes. "Good, that confirms what I suspected." He retrieved a sealed envelope, placing it gently on the desk. My heart began to race. Harold was not only my client, Walter said he was my friend for 3 decades. He trusted you deeply and confided his concerns about David's character and financial judgment. He created a secondary will, a conditional document meant to be revealed only under specific circumstances. I stared at the envelope, uncertainty twisting in my chest. Walter's voice was deliberate as he continued. "Miss Amelia, did you read the complete will at the public reading? Or did you rely on a summary?" I admitted I had only received a quick overview, believing the attorney had covered all critical points. Walter let out a surprised laugh. "Did you even read the will?" He opened the envelope. Inside was the full text I had never seen. Yes, David was named heir to $62 million, but with a condition that had never been emphasized. He would retain the principal only if he remained married to me for 5 years following Harold's death. Should he initiate divorce or separation within that period, 80% of the remaining principal and accumulated interest would immediately revert to me, held in a trust under my sole control. Below the legal text was a personal handwritten note from Harold. "Amelia, if you are reading this, it means my fears came true. I have observed your loyalty, your patience, and your unwavering support of David. He has resented your presence and undervalued your contributions. This clause is not meant to trap either of you, but to protect you from the consequences of his true nature. Your character has always proven your worth. Use this wisely." Tears blurred my vision as I read. Everything clicked: the hasty divorce, the aggressive settlement, David's rush to finalize it. He had been attempting to cheat the terms without my knowledge. I realized the power of what Harold had left me. The inheritance was no longer just money. It was leverage, a shield, a tool of justice designed to protect the person he knew was truly responsible, compassionate, and capable. Before moving on, let me pause. Have you ever discovered a hidden truth that completely changed your perspective? Share it in the comments below, and if you want to see how I turn this revelation into empowerment, don't forget to subscribe. Because from this moment, everything shifted. David was no longer in control. Harold's foresight ensured that justice had a path, and I was about to take it. When I confronted David with the existence of the conditional clause, the transformation in his demeanor was immediate and shocking. Gone was the arrogant man who had thrown me out and mocked my devotion. Instead, before me stood a man, pale, shaken, hair unkempt suit, wrinkled, his designer polish gone, replaced by panic and desperation. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice trembling. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. I've made a huge mistake." I held the envelope tightly in my hands, my heart beat loud in the silent apartment. "What mistake exactly?" I asked, my voice steady. "The divorce," he said, quickly, fumbling. "It was hasty and unnecessary." I wasn't thinking clearly. You seemed so resolute when you told me I was useless. I didn't mean that. I under pressure inheritance responsibilities. I said things I'll always regret." His eyes pleaded for something I no longer possessed: trust. I studied him closely, and I asked the question that would reveal everything. "When did you find out about the clause in your father's will?" His hesitation told me everything. The flicker of guilt in his eyes, the shift in his posture, the almost imperceptible shrink back, it was confirmation. He had known, or at least suspected, the clause existed. He had gambled that I would never discover it in time to challenge his plans. The reality hit me with a mixture of disbelief and satisfaction. David had tried to manipulate the system to bend it to his selfish will, yet Harold had anticipated this. The trust was ironclad and forcible, designed to protect me, and now it was my turn to activate it. David fell to his knees, his voice breaking, begging, "Please, Amelia, I need your help. I've already spent millions. Properties, investments, commitments. Veronica left when the money started running out. I need you." I could hardly believe it. The man who had called me useless, who had dismissed my sacrifices and mocked my loyalty, now depended on me to save his wealth. The irony was not lost on me. I remained calm. "You need my help," I repeated, the weight of those words settling like stones. His desperation intensified, his pleas, escalating gifts, arriving grand gestures, every attempt a mixture of shame and manipulation. He promised to put all remaining assets in my name, to restructure his life completely around my terms. But the truth was clear: his focus remained on money, not on the marriage he had destroyed. And yet I felt the first true sense of empowerment I had known in years. All of Harold's foresight, every quiet warning, every private moment he had shared with me, it had prepared me for this. I had the power now. The inheritance was no longer just a number. It was justice, delivered in the currency Harold had trusted me to wield wisely. Before I continue, let me ask you, have you ever been in a position where someone who wronged you suddenly needed your help? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want to see how I navigated this, subscribe and stay with me, because this was only the beginning. David's arrogance, his desperation, the twists of fate, all of it was about to unfold in a way that would change our lives forever. Once the gravity of Harold's clause sank in, I moved swiftly, activating the provisions of the trust. The legal machinery that Harold had quietly set in motion began to hum into action. Walter Green guided me through each step, filing the necessary documents to ensure the trust's terms were enforced immediately. David's attorneys responded, quickly, predictably, with counterclaims accusing me of fraud and undue influence. They claimed I had manipulated Harold into inserting the clause, a ridiculous assertion, given the meticulous legal structure Harold had established. The discovery process revealed disturbing evidence of David's prior actions. Emails showed that he had indeed offered Thomas Bernard a substantial bonus to withhold information about the conditional inheritance. Bank transfers documented millions already spent on impulsive luxury purchases. Text messages with Veronica outlined plans to finalize the divorce before I could learn the truth. Each piece confirmed what I had already suspected: he had tried to circumvent the very clause that would protect me. Throughout the hearings, the judge, a woman with 3 decades of experience in family court, made her disapproval of David's behavior clear. She questioned the ethical violations of his legal team and referred matters to the State Bar Association for investigation. The courtroom became a stage where justice, slow and deliberate, unfolded. Witnesses testified. Documents were scrutinized. The timeline of deception was laid bare. After 3 intense months, the ruling came down. The court fully enforced Harold's trust provisions. David's attempts to manipulate the inheritance were invalidated. The bulk of the estate, nearly $50 million, was now under my control. The ruling was not just a legal victory. It was a validation of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of endurance I had lived through during those 7 years. For the first time, I felt the weight of empowerment settle around me. The money was no longer just numbers on a page, it was a tool, a responsibility, a shield. I began assembling a team of financial advisors, each with fiduciary duty and expertise in investment taxation and estate management. Together, we developed a conservative strategy focused on capital preservation, sustainable growth, and careful distribution. Unlike David's impulsive spending, my approach was methodical, deliberate, and aligned with the values Harold had trusted me to uphold. Despite the newfound wealth, I remained in my modest apartment. I did not rush into extravagant purchases or change my lifestyle impulsively. I wanted time to process the betrayal, the lessons learned, and to ensure that my decisions would reflect wisdom rather than reaction. Every step was deliberate, a conscious reclaiming of control over my life. Even as David's family reached out, attempting to pressure me into sharing the inheritance, I maintained boundaries. His mother, persistent and increasingly aggressive, tried appeals to loyalty, to family unity, to forgiveness. But I responded calmly, citing Harold's explicit wishes and the protections he had put in place for me. Every attempt to manipulate or cajole me only reinforced the clarity of my path. In those weeks, I began reconnecting with my own family and friends. Relationships that had suffered under David's subtle isolation tactics were restored. Therapy sessions helped me process the emotional trauma, rebuild boundaries, and cultivate resilience. I was learning not just to survive, but to thrive. Before moving forward, I want to ask you, have you ever reclaimed power after betrayal? Comment below with your story, and if you want to see how I used this victory to build a meaningful life, subscribe and stay with me. Because the legal victory, though significant, was only the beginning of a transformation that would extend far beyond money. It would redefine who I was and how I chose to live. With the trust officially activated and nearly $50 million now under my oversight, I faced a new challenge: how to manage this sudden, unprecedented wealth responsibly. I had always been financially capable, but this level of responsibility was a magnitude above anything I had encountered. Rather than succumb to impulse or luxury, I took a measured approach. I hired a team of certified financial planners, investment specialists, and a tax attorney, each chosen carefully to ensure fiduciary responsibility and transparency. We spent weeks analyzing the estate, breaking it into secure investments, retirement planning, charitable contributions, and a modest personal allowance. Unlike David, whose impulsive purchases had already cost him millions, I wanted sustainability, preservation, and the ability to create opportunities for others. My approach was deliberate, methodical, and grounded in lessons Harold had taught me through his trust and mentorship. Even as I began exercising control over the finances, I did not immediately alter my lifestyle. My apartment remained modest, my daily routines unchanged. I needed time to process the betrayal, the magnitude of my autonomy, and the implications of this wealth. Each decision was a reaffirmation of the power I now held, not just financially, but emotionally and intellectually. Meanwhile, David's behavior became increasingly erratic. As he realized his attempts at control were thwarted by the enforceable trust, he escalated his efforts. Charm turned to harassment. He circulated rumors among acquaintances alleging that I had manipulated Harold and stolen what was rightfully his. Late-night calls from unknown numbers, intermittent appearances near my workplace, and persistent emails forced me to take legal action. I filed for a restraining order, which the court granted immediately due to clear evidence of unwanted contact and intimidation. Throughout this period, I began revisiting a business plan I had shelved years before. With financial stability guaranteed, I could finally pursue my dream of opening a boutique consulting firm. I consulted industry experts, refined the concept, and conducted thorough market research. My aim was to build a business based not on inheritance or status, but on expertise, credibility, and genuine passion for helping others succeed. I located an office space that reflected a professional yet welcoming atmosphere, carefully designing it to represent my values and vision. Service packages were tailored to small businesses with a focus on financial guidance and planning. Within 6 months of launching, I secured my first major clients' businesses that took a chance on a new firm based on personal recommendations and my demonstrated knowledge. The positive feedback was immediate and validating. Clients referred others. The satisfaction of building a successful enterprise from skill rather than inheritance far exceeded any emotional satisfaction tied to the money itself. It was a tangible reminder that my capabilities, not wealth, defined my value. Before moving to the next part, I want to invite you. If you've ever rebuilt something meaningful after betrayal, share your story in the comments. And if you want to see how I continued transforming this experience into impact, subscribe now. Because the wealth, though powerful, was a tool. The true transformation lay in creating something sustainable, something purposeful, and something that would last far beyond the fleeting whims of a man who had once betrayed me. 6 months after launching my consulting firm, I realized the impact I wanted to make extended beyond just financial consulting. I founded the Harold Wilson Foundation, dedicating a significant portion of the inheritance to empower others. The focus was clear: financial education for women, particularly those recovering from economic abuse or sudden financial upheaval. Scholarships were offered to students pursuing business degrees, and mentorship programs were established for young entrepreneurs. Each initiative reflected the values Harold had trusted me to uphold: wisdom, responsibility, and integrity. The foundation became a new avenue for purpose. I watched as recipients of scholarships and mentorship thrived their successes, reminding me that true value came not from accumulation, but from creating opportunities for others. Every story of achievement reinforced the lesson Harold had instilled. Wealth is meaningful only when used wisely, and responsibility must accompany power. Meanwhile, David's attempts to manipulate or reconcile remained consistent. He contacted mutual friends, trying to persuade them to advocate on his behalf. He sent gifts, flowers, jewelry, extravagant gestures, all aimed at coaxing me into reopening a door I had firmly closed. He even offered to place remaining assets under my name or renew our vows in a grand ceremony. But the reality was clear: his focus was money, not the relationship. I responded with measured detachment. Walter Green managed communications through legal channels, ensuring that David's actions could not interfere with my personal or professional life. The more he tried, the clearer it became that his attempts were not about reconciliation, but control. I had no interest in reliving a marriage built on manipulation and deception. This period also allowed me to reconnect deeply with my family and friends. Relationships that had been strained under David's subtle isolations began to heal. Therapy sessions with Dr. Larson helped me recognize the patterns of emotional manipulation I had endured. Together, we worked on boundaries, self-respect, and cultivating healthier expectations for relationships. Dr. Larson emphasized something I had known deep down: surviving betrayal without losing your compassion is rare, and maintaining integrity in the aftermath is a profound strength. Through this process, my consulting firm continued to grow. I hired talented staff, expanding the business in ways that reflected my vision rather than inherited expectations. The focus remained on providing genuine guidance, not leveraging wealth for superficial prestige. Industry recognition followed with awards and invitations to speak at conferences, validating the tangible impact of our work. Before moving forward, let me ask, have you ever used a personal setback as a stepping stone for something bigger? Share in the comments. And if you want to see how I solidified my independence and freedom, subscribe now for the next part of my journey. Because this chapter was about more than money, it was about control, purpose, and ensuring that every step I took reflected my values rather than the whims of someone who had once betrayed me. Every decision I made was a testament to resilience, to foresight, and to the life I had fought to reclaim. During this period of rebuilding, I had to establish clear boundaries with David and his family. Despite my legal victories and professional success, they attempted multiple times to intrude into my life. David's mother made repeated phone calls, first attempting to appeal to family loyalty, then escalating to implied threats about contesting the will or offering me private settlements to share the inheritance. She insisted David is family. Harold would have wanted you to forgive him. I responded firmly, calmly, and without compromise. Harold's instructions were explicit, and I was committed to honoring them. There was no negotiation, no emotional manipulation that could sway me. I even avoided face-to-face encounters, choosing to communicate only through legal channels. Once, a carefully orchestrated accidental meeting at a restaurant was arranged with David and his mother present. I excused myself, immediately sending a clear message through Walter. All communication would now go through attorneys. Meanwhile, I rebuilt connections with my own family. Years of subtle isolation under David's influence had weakened those relationships. My parents had only ever seen the curated version of our marriage I presented. Upon learning the full truth, they expressed shock and empathy. Friends I'd neglected while working tirelessly to support David welcomed me back with open arms. Jessica continued to be my strongest supporter, providing perspective when doubt crept in, and celebrating small victories in my recovery. Therapy became a cornerstone of my healing process. Dr. Larson helped me recognize patterns of emotional manipulation, understand how my boundaries had been eroded, and develop healthier expectations for future relationships. We focused on both recovery and growth, reinforcing the fact that betrayal, though deeply painful, does not define the trajectory of one's life. As my business flourished, David's behavior became increasingly erratic. When his attempts to reconcile failed charm gave way to harassment, rumors spread, late-night calls came from unknown numbers, and he accidentally appeared at multiple locations where I was meeting friends. Reluctantly, I sought legal protection and was granted a restraining order. The court's decision was immediate, recognizing the persistent, unwanted contact and the potential for escalation. Despite these challenges, I focused on what truly mattered: my personal growth, my business, and the values Harold had entrusted to me. I revisited my long-shelved business plan, and with the financial freedom provided by the inheritance, launched a boutique consulting firm with a clear vision. The focus was on tangible value, not status or luxury. Every step I took reinforced a critical lesson: power and wealth are meaningless without integrity, vision, and purpose. While David had squandered opportunities and betrayed trust, I transformed adversity into a foundation for sustainable success and authentic influence. Before moving forward, I invite you to reflect. Have you ever had to firmly protect yourself from manipulative people while building your own path? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want to see the conclusion of how I fully reclaimed my life, subscribe for the final chapters. Because in establishing boundaries, I didn't just protect my inheritance. I protected my future, my identity, and the lessons that would guide every decision from this point onward. 1 year after the divorce, I barely recognized the woman who had signed those final papers. The fragile, anxious version of myself had been replaced with someone stronger, wiser, and more grounded. My consulting business had grown into a thriving firm, with 3 employees each bringing complementary skills that strengthened our services and expanded our reach. The office, modest yet professional, reflected my values: integrity, competence, and care. Each day brought new challenges, but unlike before, they were welcomed. They engaged my mind and talents, fully offering the satisfaction of work built on merit rather than circumstance. David, in contrast, had unraveled. The man who once flaunted his inheritance and mocked my loyalty had lost nearly everything. Malibu properties were foreclosed, risky investments collapsed, and Veronica had left months prior seeking someone with better prospects. When we unexpectedly encountered each other at a downtown restaurant, the contrast was startling. His designer suits replaced by wrinkled khakis, hair thinning, and untamed confidence replaced by a shadow of regret. He approached cautiously, asking if he could sit and talk, not to reconcile, he claimed, but simply to acknowledge the past and perhaps maintain occasional contact. I remained composed. Boundaries were now my armor. It would not be healthy for either of us, I said gently, ensuring clarity without malice. He nodded, accepting the decision without argument. As he left, I quietly paid his bar tab, not out of obligation, but as a final gesture of closure. The transformation I experienced was not only financial or professional, but deeply personal. I had learned to define my worth independently of anyone else's approval or betrayal. Money had never been the goal. It was a tool, a vehicle for creating meaningful, lasting impact. The trust Harold had placed in me, coupled with the lessons of resilience I had cultivated through hardship, allowed me to rebuild a life aligned with my principles and ambitions. My consulting firm expanded beyond initial projections, serving more clients and developing programs that reflected my philosophy of empowerment. I established the Harold Wilson Foundation, channeling part of the inheritance into scholarships, mentorship, and financial education initiatives for women, particularly those recovering from financial abuse. Each success story reinforced that true wealth lies not in accumulation, but in fostering growth and opportunity for others. Therapy, reflection, and supportive friendships helped solidify my sense of self. I began dating cautiously, aware of my boundaries, and confident in my judgment. Every relationship, every interaction was informed by lessons learned, the importance of trust, communication, and mutual respect. The betrayal that had once defined my narrative had become merely a chapter, a source of strength rather than despair. Before concluding, I want to ask, have you ever faced a moment where losing everything led you to discover your true strength? Share your story in the comments, and if this journey resonates with you, subscribe to follow more stories of empowerment and resilience. The journey from devastation to empowerment taught me the most important lesson of all. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted is the only way to gain what you truly deserve. Money revealed David's true character, but hardship revealed mine. The freedom to rebuild, to make decisions grounded in purpose rather than obligation, and to create something meaningful. This was the inheritance I will carry for the rest of my life. Because through betrayal, I found myself. Through adversity, I reclaimed my voice. And through courage, I discovered that resilience is the most valuable legacy anyone can leave behind. Looking back over the past year, I realized that what I thought was the end, the betrayal, the divorce, the loss of stability, was actually the beginning of a life I never imagined. Sitting in my modest apartment, watching my consulting firm grow, I felt a quiet satisfaction that came not from wealth, but from self-reliance, clarity, and purpose. Every decision, every strategy, every small victory was a testament to the resilience I had cultivated in the months following David's betrayal. I had learned to value myself beyond what anyone else thought or demanded. Money had once been a measure of my worth in the eyes of my husband, a tool for his control, but now it was a vehicle for freedom, for opportunity, and for the creation of something meaningful. The Harold Wilson Foundation. The scholarships and mentorship programs became more than projects. They became a reflection of my values. The real inheritance Harold had intended to leave me responsibility, empowerment, and justice. Even as life returned to a steady rhythm, I remained vigilant. Boundaries were no longer suggestions, but firm lines I would not allow anyone to cross. David's presence in my life had faded to a memory of lessons learned. Trust is earned, loyalty is respected, and character is revealed under pressure. His downfall contrasted sharply with my rise, not in terms of material wealth, but in integrity, vision, and self-awareness. I also rediscovered the beauty of relationships built on respect and mutual care. Friends who had stood by me, family who had believed in me, and the community I cultivated through my work reminded me that support and connection are far more sustaining than any inheritance or luxury. Now I walk through the city with a quiet confidence, knowing that my worth is intrinsic, that my accomplishments are genuine, and that I have built a life that aligns with who I truly am. The betrayal that once seemed insurmountable has become a chapter of growth, teaching me that freedom, purpose, and self-respect are the greatest gifts anyone can receive. Sometimes losing what you thought you needed is the only way to find what you truly deserve, and in that discovery, I have found peace.